Welcome to Think Resolutions podcast. In this video, my special guest, Beth Fisher-Yoshida, PhD, and I will be discussing how to prepare for mediation, at least from the perspective of the parties and or their counsel. Beth is a professor of professional practice teaching classes in negotiation, conflict resolution, and conflict analysis. She is also a very prolific author of articles and a book entitled New Story, New Power, which is available on Amazon for purchase. I will put information in the comments section wherever you're going to hear or read this or hear it, see it, whatever, so that you can actually purchase her book on Amazon. My name is Howard Klein, if you didn't already know it. I've been a California I don't have to look at my notes for this, do I? I've been a California licensed attorney since 1976, and I currently serve as a mediator and arbitrator, and I'm on the national panels of the American Arbitration Association. Again, I will put more information about me and how to get in touch with me in the comments section below. So, without further ado, Beth,
Yes.
First a little context about what my thought process was when I intended to interview you. First of all, as a party, I consider mediation to essentially be a negotiation between the parties. It is my position that every time a party goes into mediation, they're basically trying to get the most that they can for the least cost, bottom line. And it's important to consider both ends of the spectrum. How much can I get? I don't know if you can see that high. And what is it going to cost me? And that's basically what you're doing in mediation. I don't know of any party going into a mediation that doesn't consider that. And as a mediator, I'm aware of that. So if a party gets into the mediation and they're acting like they're trying to get as much as they can, that's okay with me. What does it mean to prepare for a mediated negotiation? Beth, take it away.
The first I'm going to ask you, you're talking about on the part of the mediator preparing or on the part of the parties?
On the part of the parties,
Okay.
the perspective is going to be, we're basically going to the parties in this video and telling them what is it that you should be thinking about and how do you prepare for the mediation. As a mediator, it's a totally different hat.
Right. Okay, great. So I think what's really important is that you prepare, period. And I'll get into a little bit more details. I think too many times people show up thinking they know what's going on and they know what they want, and they're maybe dependent on the mediator to run the show, right? But that doesn't mean that you're going to get everything you want or as much as you can if you're not prepared. So in being prepared, that means that you have really explored the issues, you've explored the relationship, you've explored why there's a mediation in the first place. You're thinking about your emotional engagement in the situation, trying to think about how am I going to manage my emotions to be level-headed as much as possible. Not that you have to be a robot, you can still show emotions. Thinking about what is it that really is the most critical for you to get and what are the nice to have, and then where are the concessions. So you have a whole array of choices to negotiate about, not just one item or not just one thing or one service, because then you're really limiting yourself. And if the other party says no, then what do you do, right? And so you have to think about the flexibility you have, but you can't do that unless you really know what you want, what is most critical to you.
Talking about what is it that is most critical to you. As mediators, we hear this interest versus position. And why don't you explain what that is?
Sure. So positional clash is the original reason that there's even a conflict to begin with. Now, real or perceived clash. Sometimes we think we're clashing with somebody else, but in actuality, we may not be. We may just be saying it differently or framing it differently. So that needs to be explored. But when you have a positional clash, it's a very zero-sum game. And so you win or you lose. There can't be two of the same sides. If you go underneath and say, what's fueling me or the other party to take that position, then what are the interests? What is causing me to take the position? Position is a very limited stance, and I may not have had the creativity to think more broadly about it until I calm down, because when you're in conflict situation, you have cognitive rigidity. So I calm down, I think more thoroughly, and I understand that position is just one way of satisfying my interests.
Why don't you, if you can, give an example of position versus interest?
I'll give a very simple one. Let's just say, for example, I say, give me that apple. I want that apple. And you're saying, no, you can't have my apple. I said, I want that apple. If I sit and take a step back and go, why am I so fixated on this apple? Maybe I'm thinking about, okay, it's autumn and I like to eat apples in the autumn and I like the smell of the apple. I want to make apple pie, whatever it is. Or maybe I say, I'm hungry and I want to eat some kind of fruit. I don't want to eat a bad sugary dessert. So now I'm thinking more fully, in more nuance, in more detail about what's fueling me to take or demand the apple. So I can say to myself, all right, well, what else reminds me of the autumn? What else has a nice crisp flavor or crisp smell? What else can I do? So now I have options, which I did not think I had before.
One of the positions that I often hear in mediation is they're trying to take advantage of me, and I am not going to allow them to take advantage of me. On the other hand, if the dispute is, throw out a number, $10,000, and you'd be happy to take 5,000 or 7,000, the amount that you either need or you want is different from the position that you take. That battle line is the position that you take where you might be comfortable with some other type of resolution.
Right. Unless you don't do your preparation and you get so fixated on the 10,000, it becomes something else. It becomes a sign of respect when you're saying, like, take advantage of me. So now I can't take anything less than 10 because now that's disrespectful. And if they offer it to me, that reinforces my feeling that they're being disrespectful to me without really exploring it. So we get very stuck and very rigid in our position sometimes.
Well, that taking advantage of me can become the interest. You can translate that into an interest. And while we're going to talk about this probably a little bit later, it might affect a relationship.
Right.
Would it not?
It would.
In which case, if you're not going to treat me with respect, then what is our relationship on a going forward basis? And then all of a sudden, that becomes interest because you're trying to accomplish something at that point in time.
Maintaining the relationship, building it.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. We're going to talk about where relationship is. Is it important for, in your preparation, obviously you want to try to determine what the interest is. You'll recognize what the position of the opposing party is, but you will try to understand what their interest is. How do you really understand your own interest or that of your client if you're an advocate? Yeah, how important is it to really understand your client's interest?
Oh, I think it's really important. You're asking the question right, but I think it's really important because you want to understand the motivation. You want to understand what's pushing the person to even be in that situation in the first place, to be mediating something. So you want to understand how deep is the hurt, how deep is the relationship, what's at stake for the person, and then beyond the person, because there are ripple effects to all of these things. And I mentioned earlier, like, so when you understand the interest, then you are thinking more creatively and you're expanding the pie. And so you have more to choose from in that negotiation. There's more give and take. There's more conversation. Otherwise, it's just a demand and then everything's cold.
I find as an advocate, I find that extremely important, particularly when I'm trying to pay attention to what my client's interests are as their attorney. Let's go ahead and sue them and let's spend all the money in the world. And if they have all the money in the world, that's okay because they don't care. But most of my clients do care about how they spend their money. And they do care if it's a small business. They do care about the effect of a lawsuit that it has on their psyche, their ability to go forward and make money. I'm talking about in commercial instances. So it's not uncommon for me to ask questions of my clients to make sure that I fully understand what their interest is. What is it they're looking to get out of? Are they looking to just get a buck? And if so, how much? Are they considering the costs associated with a lawsuit? Because they're going to get tired of paying me eventually. The bigger companies, not so much, but the smaller ones, yes.
So I have a question to ask you. I'm not a lawyer, but you are. And so I'm wondering about the ethical
Am I going to have to charge you for this?
I'm wondering about the ethical responsibility that you feel as a lawyer to fully explore these possibilities with your client. Now, if they, at the end of the day, they just keep insisting, I don't care about all that, just go ahead and sue them. Okay. But in terms of the exploration, do you feel that's an ethical responsibility or it's not really your role?
Oh, gosh. Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. My ethical responsibility I don't feel that my ethical responsibility is to just do whatever the client wants. Certainly, if they're asking me to do something that I'm uncomfortable with, either legally or even ethically, verbally abuse opposing counsel or do a deposition only for the purpose of having the other party spend money, I have an ethical problem with that. But I believe my responsibility is to do what's best for the client. I try not to make that determination for them, but asking questions, and sometimes just asking questions, you're telling them something.
You are.
You're giving them the opportunity to think about it. How much time are you going to spend on this lawsuit? How do you feel when I am constantly asking you to respond to depositions and I go to you, I need all of your documents, not some of them. I don't want you to make the decision on what documents are necessary. Just give them all to me. And how do they feel when I pester them doing that? And that's important.
Yeah. And I think I agree with the asking a question, because then you're also shifting how people potentially think about something because of the way you're asking a question. Oh, I hadn't considered that, or, oh, I hadn't thought about it that way. So that's also a way of expanding their thinking.
And sometimes you can ask the question and the client's not ready to answer it in their own head. Sometimes it takes a little while. And that's something that I think is important both in mediation. Sometimes the parties are just not ready to settle.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Let's talk a little bit about power imbalance. Tell me a little bit about power imbalance and how that is important in a negotiation.
So I think, again, real or perceived, because sometimes there is a power imbalance, but it doesn't sort of disable you in being able to effectively negotiate. I was just looking more recently at a LinkedIn post somebody had made, and they were talking about how they were in a low power position in international relations. However, they were the person who was in charge of the schedule for the powerful person. So even though they're in a low power position hierarchically in the organization, they had tremendous power and influence because that's the door, that's access into the person's calendar. So I really appreciated that because it's a different framing of it. But power imbalance can be information like asymmetry. Like we may not have the same amount of information somebody else has. So it can be very imbalanced in that way. So there's always going to be some kind of power imbalance. So I think that you have to have a framing in your own mind about what power you do have, because there's so many ways of thinking about power rather than only the traditional way of power over. I need to control and I have influence over you to make you do what you wouldn't ordinarily have done. But information, disposition, being able to emotionally regulate can be a very powerful stance that you're taking in the negotiation, the mediation. So I think there's lots of ways of having power, but I don't think the average person considers the breadth of the different ways of having power and how they show up.
What's the purpose of understanding power when you're in a negotiation? What are you going to do about it? The other person, you're going, well, the other person's got a lot more money than me, so they've got power. They can afford fighting this. That's an issue of power. So what's the purpose of understanding that? What can you do about it?
Well, if you go in knowing that, then you have to decide, what am I going to do with that information? If that information overpowers me and I say, well, I've already lost because I have no leverage, this person has more money, then that means I can only go until the end of this week. I can't continue this lawsuit any further because I can't afford it. They can outride me, right? So then I have to think, okay, is it worth engaging in that? Is there something else, a different kind of power? What's my relationship with that person in the negotiation, in the mediation situation? I think it's not only recognizing the power, it's how do you understand what that does to you in terms of your performance, your behavior, your attitude, about how you show up in the negotiation. I've met people along in life who don't look like they have a lot of power. They don't necessarily have a lot of money. They don't have a lot of material things. They may not have a high position in an organizational context, but they are so powerful. They have such presence. So it's a different kind of power, and it's how you own your power and how you show up that makes a difference, I think.
You're making me think
Oh,
about,
no.
oh, hold it.
Sorry.
Oh, forbid. You're making me think about how I practiced law. I litigated very early on in my career. 6'2", 240 pounds, bench pressed 400 pounds. I was a big, intimidating person. And I just had that air about me, a powerful air. And the problem was very early on in my career, I didn't know anything. So I would hide the fear of not having the knowledge and the experience of really representing my client well. And I can remember just standing in court and intimidating the other side into thinking that I knew what I was talking about. I could talk a great game, and I would get what I wanted because they were afraid of losing to me in court. And I abused that. I'm sorry, but I did. But my clients loved it. Clients loved it. And I think that's an example of a power imbalance. You write a lot about women and the issues that women have in negotiations. Could you give an example of power imbalance that women encounter often in negotiations?
So we all have different kinds of stories that we tell ourselves about who we are in this world and what we can do, what we can't do. And the stories come from lots of different places, from our families, our education, the media, especially social media these days. But we're not always conscious of what those stories are, but they're always influencing us and how we operate. So if you are physically, you mentioned about your big stature, right, and intimidating. If you are a petite woman, right away, people might say, oh, like, isn't she cute, kind of a thing. So they're already diminishing your power. And even if they don't say it, then you feel that maybe they're saying it because that's what you've heard all these years and you've internalized that. Or maybe women are allowed to be assertive in certain situations about certain issues. So all of that plays into how somebody shows up. So you have to, again, it goes back to the awareness. You need to understand what those stories are and what they do for you. And I say, okay, when you identify them, which are the stories that work for you, that they give you power, that they give you confidence, they help you articulate what you want, then you want to grow those. You want those to be the dominant stories. What are the stories that just get in your way? And rewrite them or press the delete button and get rid of them if you can. Now, you always have to replace them with something because they take up a space in your being. And then you also have to think about, or not worry about, but think about what's the perception that person has. As soon as you open the door and walk into a situation, you already are making an impression. People already are placing certain opinions about who you are and all of that, until they get to know you. But that initial impression, they always say you can only have one first impression. That initial impression is going to shape how they interact with you. So those stories get in the way. The social, cultural stories that men grow up with, any culture in the world, versus the ones that women grow up with anywhere in the world are different. Some overlap, but some are different. And that plays a role in a negotiation.
How does leverage fit into this? I think leverage has something to do with power. I'm always, when I'm negotiating, I use the term leverage. I'm not looking for power. I'm looking for leverage. Just
Right.
give me that little place that I can just, it's kind of like water going into a pothole and over the winter freezing, and it's just getting bigger and bigger and bigger. That's the perception I have in my head.
So leverage is also, I think, power. When you have leverage, you have power in a situation. I remember once I was working with a client, a commercial client, and they said they wanted to change their negotiating culture. And they wanted to go from being very transactional to very relational. And we were talking about power, we were talking about leverage. So in order to do that, you have to figure out creating the need for the negotiation. This was part of it. Why should somebody engage with you? If they don't think they can benefit from engaging with you, they're not going to engage with you if they don't have to. So how do you create that need where you say, but I am valuable to you? That's your leverage right there. That's one way of creating the leverage that may not be apparent. There are many different types of leverage.
You used a phrase, relational versus
Transactional.
transactional. Why don't you explain that?
What I mean by that is it's just you have a product, I give you money, that's it, right? And it could be a one-off transaction. And every time we go back to the table, it's a new day, a new interaction. Relational is where I'm not only caring about the transaction, I'm caring about the livelihood of your business. I want to make sure that you're in business because my company benefits from it. So we do more in relation to each other. I may not drive as hard a bargain. Sometimes I may pull back other times because I want you to survive and walk away successful and me be successful so that we both come back to the table in a better way. Some of these transactions that I've witnessed are so rough that think about the attitude or the person coming back to the table after being beaten down. They will try not to come back to the table. They may try to find an alternative supplier, for example, with the supply chain. Or, they're going to come in even tougher next time. No allowances for anything, but you've already built that. You've done that. It doesn't mean you can't change it, but it does mean that overnight, you're not going to go in on Monday, be one way, and then on Tuesday, be a different way. Where's the trust, right? You haven't built the relationship. And I think of negotiation as relational.
Let me go on to the emotional issues. Understanding the emotional issues of the other side, as well as your own. How important is that?
I think it's really important because it's okay to, of course, have emotions as long as they work for you and don't get in your way. If you don't, you still may be surprised that suddenly this emotion wells up from inside of you. You don't even know where it came from. So something can trigger you there. It goes back to what we teach in our program too, what I work with people on is old self-awareness. You have to understand your values. So then you know what's critically important to you. You have to understand your triggers, like what still gets under your skin is going to be something that really provokes you. And if it does, what are you going to do? That's not the time in the first situation to start meditating. You have to already have a practice that calms you down and keeps you rational, because it changes your brain waves and you're not your best functioning self. So emotional regulation is really critical. It doesn't mean to be stone cold or like a robot. It means you can still emote. And I mean, it's some people might manipulate emotions too. I think some people get more emotional in some situations just to intimidate or to steer you away from what's really important to them. They pretend something's important or not. But if you're going through in a very genuine, honest way, you still need to be in touch with your own emotions and understand and then see what's triggering the other party as well.
I've lectured on this issue and trying to get to the heart of it. I didn't like the idea of telling people, well, you need to control your emotions. And people look at me going, it's easier said than done.
Yeah,
How do you
good
do
luck.
that? Yeah. And you need to be self-aware. Well, how do I do that? When someone says something and I quickly respond, and I had decided that self-awareness is very important. Controlling your emotions is very important. Unfortunately, I don't always do that. Sometimes I just react depending upon my temperature, what I've eaten for lunch, or whatever. But I started delving into something called keystone habits. What's the one thing that I can do that might work? And if I do that, I'm able to sit back. And that keystone habit for me is hearing something.
It makes a difference.
Yeah, it doesn't always work, but sometimes I open my mouth before I take that breath. Over time, practicing it, you start developing that one keystone habit from which all the other habits follow. So, yeah, self awareness, understanding your own emotions and understanding the emotions of the other people. Why is understanding the emotions of other people, the other side, why is that important?
I think they're revealing information for you. Emotions are information. And so they're letting you know what's important to them, what matters to them. And that helps in the relationship or the transaction, what you're doing. Sometimes when people say things or they get emotional about something or they say something that's provocative, right? And look, but trying to provoke me, I usually take a step back and I'm like, okay, why are they saying this to me? Why do they want me to know this? What do they expect to happen? Because sometimes people will say things that could be insulting to you or ridiculing you, whatever it is. I'm like, okay, that's interesting. Why are they saying it that way? And why do they want? But there are people who say things and they don't think they're being hurtful. And I'm just thinking, did you mean to say it that way? Because that's pretty harsh. And they're like, what? You know? So I think when I was younger, it was harder for me not to take things personally. Now I take a step back most of the time and I'll just say, okay, why do they want me to know that? What do you want me to do with that information? And I will explore it more than react to it.
Well, that takes practice, doesn't it?
Practice and age and experience.
Yes, it makes a difference. So, if you understand how other people react, their emotional reaction, not their intellectual reaction, doesn't it affect the questions that you ask and how you ask them?
Yeah. So when you're talking, even if it's a monetary transaction, it's not only about the money. One time in small claims court, I was mediating and somebody was suing the other party for $28. And I thought, okay, rocket science. I'm like, it's not only about the $28, because why would you go to all the effort of going to small claims court for that? But it was about disrespect. It was about lots of other things in there. Respect gets tied into it. Competence can get tied into it. Maybe you think I'm incompetent, so I have to stand my ground on something. There are all those other kinds of dynamics that are in there, not just the stated issue.
Why is that important? I'm trying not to feed you the word that I'm thinking of, but why is that if it's transactional?
Even transactional, because you want to know where your leverage is. You want to understand the range of possibilities there. If you can understand what's critically important to that person, because it's not only about the money. I think very rarely is it only about the money. If I built a business and I put my blood and sweat into it, and then I'm selling it, if I'm not getting what I value, it's not only about the money. It's all of the disrespect, all of what I like. You're criticizing me in the company I built. So it's a lot of personal stuff in there, and you need to understand that, I think, and even if it's transactional.
Well, it's important if you take a collaborative approach. I was really trying not to use the word collaborative. Not that it's inappropriate, but I've found myself over the many years that I've been practicing law that I actually started being much more collaborative in my approach. And then I discovered that people write about collaborative law and it's a thing. Now, I didn't study it, I just evolved into it. Why don't you express what collaborating, how the parties collaborate, and how that comes into the preparation for mediation?
There are a couple of main differences. So one is that there is a level of trust between the parties in order to collaborate, because other things happen when you're collaborating. You're sharing more information, so you're disclosing things. You might make yourself a little bit more vulnerable in the situation, but you're trusting, not 100% with everything, but you're trusting that the other party's not going to intentionally harm you by sharing this information. So you have to have some kind of rapport, some kind of trust. And then, so the information, the tone, both people walking away, leaving something on the table so people can save face and you walk away with something. So the whole tone and preparation is different. But I want you to also think, even in competitive, so if I went back to that example, okay, so let's just say there are two people taking a competitive stance. If you still understand the emotional connection somebody has with a transaction, then you also know where you can push or not push. Because if it turns into other things like disrespect, then the person will absolutely not. I will never sell it to that person, no matter how much they offer me. And you're trying to whittle it down. You've already turned them off because of all this, what it symbolizes to them. So it's not only about the money, but you don't have that when you're in collaboration. Collaboration, very often people say to me, oh, yeah, I'm collaborative. I'm like, okay, but I know that they're just trying to win or trying to get it. I'm like, okay, you may say you're collaborative, but here are the behaviors that are not really exemplifying collaborative approaches.
Of course, you probably heard the term, I want a win-win situation. And of course, nobody, once you hear that, you're going, yeah, sure you do. All right. Nobody believes that. But collaborative approach is really a movement towards or the goal of collaboration. And I see collaboration when you're not collaborative. Party A has 1, 2, 3 solutions. Party B has 4, 5, 6 solutions. And if you collaborate and you understand the interests, if I understand your interests and you understand my interests, you are able to communicate, carving out the emotion, and you may find out that there are solutions 10 through 50 that you hadn't thought of. And that's where the gold is, in my opinion.
So it takes a lot of time, and there has to be an intention to want to do it, because you have to put a lot more effort into it.
It's not only the questions that you ask, but how you ask them. And how do you know how to ask a question?
Life. One of the things I've been recommending a lot more now is you need to have an immediate response ready when somebody says something to you that you're not sure, like, what is that? And you feel insulted or something. So I always recommend erring on the side of being curious, curiosity, not to assume that you know what their intention was, that they said it in the way that really was communicating to you what they meant. Because sometimes we say things and we think we're being clear, but we're not being clear to the other party. It could be understood in different ways. So if you enter in with curiosity, you're asking an open question, and it has to be sincere because people can know if you're not sincere. So you're really saying, I wasn't expecting you to say that. Can you tell me more about that? Or, oh, that surprised me. So something like, wow, okay, tell me more. I want to understand more deeply where you're coming from, because maybe we're saying the same thing, but I'm not sure. And then you realize once somebody explains it, okay, yeah, we are very different. Or no, actually, we all do have some common ground there. I didn't realize by the way you had explained it before. So opening up the space with curiosity to share information, I think, is a good way.
Okay. So now I'm going to put you on the spot again.
Okay.
How do you get yourself to be curious? And how do you be sincere? I've had people say, oh gosh, you're very sincere. Yeah. How do I become as sincere as you? And I haven't I haven't the slightest idea how to get people to be as curious as me. I can give you a perfect example. And I don't want to bring politics into this, but when my brother-in-law, this is a perfect example. Now, I'm generally a very curious person. When my brother-in-law and his father told me that they were first going to vote for Donald Trump, my immediate reaction, I didn't say it, but in my head, I'm going, what, are you out of your mind? What, are you crazy? What, are you stupid? And then I stopped myself a second. And I went, wait a second. I know these people, and they are two of the smartest people that I know. I really need to understand why they think the way they think. Now, that's me. I'm 74 years old. I don't know that I was always like that. But how do you get to do something like that? I didn't plan on that. I just happened to go, whoa, before I say something really stupid, which I've been known to do, I got to understand. And I think that's really, really important. How do you get yourself to be curious like that?
So I'm naturally a curious person anyway. And what I do is because I frame negotiation, mediation as relational, it means I care about the relationship, maybe not forever, but for this interaction, I do. I care about that. And that means I want to really understand where you're coming from and what's going on, because whatever the interaction is, it could be something very superficial. It could be something very deep. I want to be my best self in that moment. And I want you to be your best self. So I have to help you be your best self in that moment by creating that dynamic that allows you to show your best self. And so that means I have to have genuine curiosity. I may think, oh my God, that person is bizarre. But then they start talking and then I understand more. I'm shortchanging myself by not being curious. I'm losing out on learning something really important. I love soaking up knowledge. So I'm losing out if I don't question and find out more about what this person's thinking and why they're thinking that way. It makes me more well-rounded as well.
Well, I'm curious on how you can teach someone how to be curious and how you can teach someone to be sincere, not act sincere.
Again, it goes back to the self-awareness piece. You have to really understand yourself and understand you're not going to find everybody interesting. But I've also learned over the years, been around a minute too, even if I've met so many people who I thought at first, oh, I don't think they're going to be interesting. And then I talk to them, it's like, oh my God, they are so interesting. I had no idea, don't judge a book by its cover. So if we're teaching people about their worldview and understanding the layers of how they're made to be who they are, then we all have assumptions. We all have biases. We all do that. You need to surface those and see what they are, because they're going to color every way you see the world and how you understand it and how you act in it. So I'm always working with students, with clients, whatever it is. You have assumptions. What's the assumption you're making? It's just like you're making assumptions about other people, they're making assumptions about you. Are you going to prove them right? And then I say assumptions themselves are not bad. They protect us, but we can't only stop there. We have to continue to explore and see what the validity is and where they even came from in the first place.
I think that it's just a wonderful way of suggesting it. And I think that I've become even that much more self-aware since I've become a mediator. I am much less judgmental, and that serves me well in my life, that I tend to go, "Oh, okay, I need to hear more. Let me not judge." Now, honestly, if I'm sitting in a mediation, sometimes I do go, "What a nut job." I can try to control that. Certainly, I can't show that I'm thinking that. And if I'm not going to show that I'm thinking that, it helps me sit back and listen. But as a mediator, I'm laser focused on what their interest is. I mean, laser focused. It's a very different hat than I wear as an attorney and an arbitrator.
If you think about what had to happen in the people's lives to bring them into the situation of mediation, there's hurt, there's conflict, there's something unfortunate, and not everybody has the ability, or not every situation can be resolved. And so they had to suffer before they got to that table, and they're still suffering. So that's the part I think that also brings out my compassion in those situations. Even if I don't agree with them, but I know that they've been hurting, and that's what brought them there. So if I can understand them better and connect with them as another human, I think that's just helpful.
I have two more questions and we'll
Mm-hmm.
wrap this up. How important, and we're again talking about preparation, the party's preparation for mediation, how important is it to understand the mediator's approach to mediation, whether it's facilitative versus evaluative? How important is that?
Well, I think it's really critical. Now, I don't think the average person knows the difference if you say it. I think they need to know, what does that mean for me in the situation? Well, I'm going to ask you a question and I'm not going to give you direction, or I'm going to ask you a question, I'm going to direct you to a certain, whatever it is. I would want to know, okay, what does that mean? What does that mean? How we're going to interact with one another. So I think not only naming what it is, you can teach them the name, but I think understanding the behavior. Because if I'm with a very evaluative mediator and I want to do more of the talking, but I'm not because I'm being a little bit more managed, I need to know that, because maybe that's just not the right fit. Same with like a transformative mediator. It may not be the right fit for me, but it may be the right fit. So I need to know.
Well, just on a quick, facilitative is the mediator is just trying to get the parties to talk
Right.
in perhaps in an as unemotional way as possible so that they can focus on their interests, and then the mediator can help them come up with their own solutions. Where a evaluative mediator, as a party, you're looking for the mediator to influence the settlement in a way that is to your own benefit.
Yeah.
And I have a tough time with that. Okay, finally, let's talk about, if there was one thing that a person should walk away from after listening to this, what is that one thing? Because I watched some of your other videos and I recall you going, "I hate when you ask me for one thing."
Oh, yeah.
There are so many.
Know yourself and understand what's important to you. That is it, because that will help you understand your relationship with other people. And it'll help you understand, why am I so upset about this? Why am I bothered by this? Why am I so happy with this? Just understanding and asking yourself those questions. Sometimes I'll wake up in the morning, I'll just be so happy. I'm like, why am I so happy? Not that I don't want to be happy, but I'm like, okay, what happened that I'm like excited and happy more than normal? And then I think, oh, and I sort of reflect back on what happened the day before or recently, or what I'm looking forward to. So I think just doing that, reflecting on a daily basis about what happened and what you're happy about, what you're not happy about, I think it's just healthy.
Great.
What about you, Howard? What's one thing they can take away?
Well, I'm a curious person. I'm also very practical. I really don't like saying, well, you should do this and you should do that and you should think like this. I'm trying to figure out how to literally help people help themselves. And it just struck me as I was telling you how being a mediator and training to be a mediator has helped me in my real life. I'm thinking that, maybe in elementary school, they should be teaching techniques and
Yeah.
mediation.
Yeah.
That this stuff should be learned at a very early stage. How to have a civil discussion, how not to act emotionally and angry when someone disagrees with you. And I think training as a mediator can be helpful. Now, obviously, a 7-year-old is not going to become a mediator. Maybe not. But that's what I'm thinking about right now. And that's where our conversation has led me to.
Well, there are peer mediation programs. One of my daughters learned when she was in 4th grade, 10-year-old. So, and I'm not saying they're as sophisticated, but I agree with you that from younger ages, character development, mediation, understanding how to ask certain kinds of questions, how to have empathy for somebody else, those are all good things to have.
And then they should start at an early age.
I agree.
Because they're not going to, maybe by the time they get through college, they'll actually have developed the skills. So, if they're lucky, or by the time they're 74.
There you go. There's always hope.
Yeah, there's always hope. Well, Beth, thank you very much. I really enjoyed this. You've done a wonderful job. And I will let you know when this is going to be posted, which should be within the next week.
That's great. Thank you so much, Howard, for reaching out. And it's been about a year since we met.
Beth, thank you very much. And that's a wrap.
Thank you, Howard.